The second excitement. I remember the feeling. My first laptop. The screen coming to life, the machine humming, the sense that something vast and new had just been handed to me personally. I was young, and I had no framework for what I was holding, just the pure, unfiltered excitement of it. Technology felt like magic then, and for a long time after, I kept waiting to feel that way again. The feeling faded, gradually, quietly, the way enthusiasm tends to fade when something extraordinary becomes familiar. The internet had changed everything and then become the furniture of daily life. The smartphone had collapsed the world into my pocket and then become as unremarkable as a set of keys. I found myself wondering if anything truly revolutionary was ever going to arrive again. Anything with that same charge, that same sense of standing at the beginning of something enormous. And then, after that long wait, it arrived. Artificial intelligence. And the feeling came back. It's a different kind of excitement than the one I felt as a kid. That one was about access, suddenly being connected to something larger than my immediate world. This one is more interior. It's about what happens inside the thinking when you have a tool this capable as a collaborator. The main way I use AI is by asking it questions. A lot of them. Engaging in long conversations that go places I didn't expect when they started. Fact-checking, because I know it's still new and far from perfect. And I don't hold that against it any more than I'd hold the early internet's limitations against what it eventually became. Everything in tech is a work in progress. That's not a flaw. That's the nature of the thing. What I love most is using it to challenge my own thinking. To take two completely abstract ideas and tie them together to make something new and different. To visualize. To wander. Anywhere my mind wants to go, I take it there, asking questions I wouldn't feel inclined to ask natural intelligence. Questions that are too strange, too specific, too far from any obvious practical purpose to direct at another person, but that the mind genuinely wants answered. This is the magic of AI for me. Something far more contextual than digging through search engine results. A thinking partner that meets you where you actually are. There's a conversation happening right now about what AI can do, and it's a genuinely impressive list. It writes, reasons, codes, summarizes, translates, generates, explains. It processes more information in a second than I could absorb in a lifetime. I don't argue with any of that, but there's something I keep returning to, something that gets quieter in that conversation the louder the capabilities get. The question of what natural intelligence actually is, what it does that isn't on the list, what it brings to the exchange that the tool itself cannot initiate. When I use AI to connect two abstract ideas from completely different domains, the connection doesn't come from the AI. It comes from me. I'm the one who noticed that these two things, separated by discipline, by era, by context, might have something to say to each other. That noticing is the human move. The AI can develop the connection once I point at it, but the pointing is mine. And I think that pointing comes from somewhere specific, from lived experience, from the particular shape of a life, the books read in a certain order, the losses absorbed, the obsessions followed without knowing why, the failures that redirected everything. The way we connect certain dots gives us an idea of our spirit and character. The connections I make are a portrait of who I am in a way that a list of facts about me could never be. They reveal what I actually find interesting, what I've been quietly thinking about, what patterns my mind reaches for when given the freedom to reach. A machine trained on everything humanity has produced can tell you what connections have already been made. It can find patterns in what exists. What it can't do, at least not yet, and perhaps not in the way that matters, is want something, have a stake in the outcome, bring the particular weight of a specific life to a question and let that weight change the answer. That weight is what makes certain connections feel true rather than merely clever. I think about this especially in creative work.
The most interesting things I've made or thought didn't come from assembling information correctly. They came from a collision, something personal meeting something external at just the right angle, and the impact producing something neither element contained alone. AI can be part of that collision. It can be the external element, the provocateur, the surface the idea bounces off. But the personal element, the thing that makes the collision meaningful rather than merely interesting, that still has to come from human life. This might change. The race towards artificial general intelligence is real, and what it produces may eventually blur these lines in ways I can't fully anticipate from here. But right now, in this particular window of time, natural intelligence is the key driver, the irreplaceable ingredient, the thing that determines whether the output of any human-AI collaboration has a soul or just a structure. I find that worth appreciating while it's still clearly true, worth using deliberately rather than assuming it will always be the obvious distinction it is today. So I'll ask you, when you think about the connections only your particular life would lead you to make, what's one that feels distinctly, irreplaceably yours?
There's something I've been paying close attention to lately. Not just what goes into my body, but what goes into my mind. We talk a lot about clean eating, about reading labels, about what we're willing to put on our plates. But the mind? That tends to get a free pass, and I think that's a mistake. The tricky part is that mental input doesn't always announce itself. Some of it seeps in quietly. Background noise you barely register until you realize something has shifted in you. Blue light from a screen late at night, for example. It seems harmless. You're just scrolling, winding down, maybe watching something. But that light is actually stimulating your nervous system, keeping you wired when you're supposed to be winding down. The mind gets tricked into thinking it's still daytime. That's the sneaky part. Or music. I've really noticed, that certain music can reach into something emotional in me and rearrange it. There's a specific combination of tones, a certain melodic quality that can shift my whole mood without me consciously choosing that shift. I'll be fine, and then a song comes on and something gets introduced. A heaviness, a longing, something unresolved, and I carry that into whatever I'm doing next. It doesn't mean the music is bad, it just means I have to be intentional about when I let it in, which is why when I'm trying to create or think clearly, I sometimes choose silence. Not as deprivation, I'll turn the music up after a good long session and it feels earned, but in those focus hours, silence is actually the richest thing I can give myself. Then there's the feed. Social media, news, the ambient scroll. I've started to think of certain feeds the way I think about junk food. Not necessarily evil, but definitely not neutral. The wrong content at the wrong time can leave a residue. I'll feel vaguely off the next morning, this low-level fog or sadness, and I have to trace it back. Oh, that story I read, that footage I saw, that comment thread I somehow ended up in at 11 p.m. The mind absorbs things, even when you're not paying full attention, maybe especially then, when your guard is down, when you're just passively consuming. That's when things slip through the filter. So I've become something of a surveillance unit for my own mental environment. Not paranoid, more like a gardener, pulling out what doesn't belong, being selective about what gets to grow in there. It's not about sanitizing reality or pretending hard things don't exist. It's about recognizing that I have more agency over my inner climate than I usually act like I do. Every input has an output. Every feed has a consequence. What you repeatedly expose yourself to quietly becomes the texture of your inner world.
A focused day doesn't just happen, it gets built. Most people wait to feel ready, wait for the right mood, the right conditions, the perfect amount of sleep, the perfect alignment of circumstances before they sit down and do the thing. And that wait can stretch for a long time. Because the truth is, conditions are rarely perfect. The focused day isn't found. It's constructed deliberately out of whatever you actually have. For me, it starts before the work even begins. There's something about the first hour of the morning that sets a kind of atmospheric pressure for everything that follows. If I reach for my phone immediately, if I let the outside world rush in before I've had a chance to just exist in my own mind for a few minutes, something gets disrupted. The day starts on someone else's terms instead of mine. So I try to protect that window. Coffee, maybe. Stillness. A few minutes where nothing is required of me and I'm not performing for anyone, not even myself. It sounds simple. It rarely is. Then there's the question of when. Not everyone is built for the same hours, and I think people waste enormous energy fighting their own biology on this one. I know when I'm sharp. I know when my mind is elastic and willing to go somewhere difficult. That window is worth more than all the hours I might spend grinding away at the wrong time of day, tired, distracted, producing work that I'll mostly delete anyway. Guard the peak hours like they're the most valuable thing you own, because they are. Structure matters too, but not the rigid, punishing kind. I'm not talking about a schedule that turns a creative day into a corporate one, more like a loose architecture, a shape. Knowing roughly what the morning is for, what the afternoon allows, where the transitions are, when to push, and when to drift a little. Drift has its own value. Some of the best thinking happens in the in-between, in the walk, in the shower, in the half-awake moments when the analytical mind finally loosens its grip and something unexpected floats up. And then there's the matter of endings. A focused day needs a place to stop. A real stop, not just an exhausted collapse into whatever screen is nearby. I've found that how I close a session shapes how I feel going into the next one. Leave a thread hanging on purpose. Write one sentence of whatever comes next before you close the file. It gives the subconscious something to chew on overnight. You come back the next morning with the door already open instead of a blank wall. None of this is glamorous. It's not a morning routine you'd post online, or a productivity system with a catchy name. It's quieter than that. It's just the slow, honest work of figuring out how you actually function, and then building your day around that, instead of building yourself around a day that was never designed for you.
There's a concept I borrowed from finance that I keep finding new uses for. Compounding interest. The idea that returns don't just accumulate, they build on themselves. Each gain becomes the new base from which the next gain grows. Simple enough in a spreadsheet, but lately I've been turning it over in my mind and realizing it describes something much larger than money. Knowledge compounds. Not in a metaphorical, feel-good way, literally. The things you learn stack, they cross-pollinate. A concept absorbed in one area quietly reorganizes how you see something in a completely different one. You're not just adding to a pile, you're changing the shape of the container. I've been deep in a stretch of building lately. New projects, new tools, new workflows, the kind of period where everything takes longer than it should and almost nothing feels intuitive yet. There's a specific kind of friction that comes with learning something technical from scratch. The learning curve isn't just steep, it's humbling. You sit with a tool that someone else moves through effortlessly, and you're hunting for the thing they'd find in 2 seconds. It can make you feel slow, behind, like the progress isn't real because you can't see it yet. But here's what I keep coming back to. The return on that discomfort is just deferred, not absent. Every time I work through something I didn't understand yesterday, that understanding doesn't leave. It settles in, becomes infrastructure. The next time I encounter something similar, I'm not starting from zero. I'm starting from somewhere, and that somewhere is further along than I realize. It's like riding a bicycle. Once you know, you know. The body holds it, the mind holds it, and you don't have to re-earn it every time you show up. The knowledge has already been paid for. What's left is just application, and application over time is where the compounding really accelerates. I've started watching my own workflows with this in mind. Not obsessively, more like a quiet background curiosity. How long does this take me now compared to 6 weeks ago? Where am I still fumbling, and where has the fumbling quietly disappeared? There's something genuinely satisfied about noticing that a process that once took an hour now takes 20 minutes. Not because I rushed it, but because the understanding is deepened. That's the compounding. That's it working. The hard part is that it requires trust during the period when nothing looks like progress. Most people abandon things in that window, the gap between starting and the first signs of return. It feels like spinning wheels. But that window is actually where the foundation is being built. The interest hasn't shown up yet, but the principle is accumulating with every hour you put in. I think about this now whenever I'm learning something that resists me. The resistance isn't a signal to stop. It's a signal that the deposit is being made. And at some point, not immediately, but inevitably, it will start to pay.
We live in a world that has quietly declared war on waiting. Everything is optimized for now. Faster delivery, instant streaming, same-day results, overnight transformations. The infrastructure of modern life has been engineered deliberately, systematically, to collapse the distance between wanting something and having it. On the surface, that sounds like progress, but something gets lost when friction disappears entirely. Something important. Because the gap between effort and result is not just dead time. That gap is where depth forms. It's where you find out whether you actually want the thing or just the feeling of having gotten it. Most people never sit in that space long enough to find out. The discomfort arrives and they interpret it as a signal that something is wrong, that maybe the goal wasn't right, the timing wasn't right, they weren't right. And they pivot, start over, choose something with a shorter runway. I've watched this pattern in others and, honestly, in myself. That restlessness that shows up around week 3 or month 2 of something, right when the initial excitement is worn off and the actual work reveals itself for what it is. That moment is a test that most people don't realize they're taking. The ones who stay, who keep making the quiet deposits even when nothing seems to be growing, those are the ones the compounding eventually finds. It sounds almost unfair when you say it out loud, that the reward isn't distributed evenly across the timeline, that you can do everything right for months and feel like you have nothing to show for it, and then one day the curve bends and everything accelerates at once. The work was always working, it just wasn't visible yet. There's a cost to not understanding this. People abandon things at precisely the wrong moment, right before the inflection point, right when the foundation has finally been laid and something real is about to emerge. They leave early and conclude that the thing didn't work, when what actually happened is they didn't wait long enough to find out. Modern culture makes this worse by flooding us with other people's highlight reels. You see the arrival, never the years of invisible accumulation that preceded it. Someone's overnight success turns out, on closer inspection, to have been about a decade in the making. But the decade isn't the story anyone tells. So the myth persists, that transformation is fast, that results are immediate, that if it's taking a long time, something must be wrong with your approach. I've had to make a conscious decision to opt out of that framing, to measure progress differently, to treat the long stretches of slow accumulation not as failure, but the actual substance of the work. The visible results are almost secondary. They're just confirmation of what was already built in the quiet. The question worth sitting with is this: what have you walked away from right before it was about to become something? And what would be different right now if you had stayed just a little longer? I have a word I invented. Posizione. It sits somewhere between the Italian word for position and the English word for positivity. And that collision is exactly the point. It's the act of positioning myself, deliberately, into a state of mind that's open, light, and generative. I could just say positivity, but that word has been handled by too many people. It's been on coffee mugs and motivational posters and has somehow lost the texture of what it actually means to pursue it as practice. Posizione feels like mine, and that distinction matters more than it might seem. The biological side of it is almost embarrassingly straightforward. Sleep, water, a good salad, stretching before the body starts to complain, vitamins taken consistently instead of sporadically. These are the basics, the things everyone knows and most people let slip first when life gets complicated. But I've noticed that when I neglect them, the foundation underneath everything else quietly softens. The mind starts operating in a lower register, less elastic, less willing to reach. Then there's the other list, the less controllable one, the biological states that have to arrive on their own terms and can't be manufactured on demand. Laughter is the one I think about most. I have a particular kind of humor, specific, dry, a little unexpected. It doesn't fire easily. I'm not the person in the room laughing at everything, and I can't force it into existence just because it would be useful right now. But when it arrives, real laughter, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, something shifts in me that no supplement or sleep schedule can replicate. It's a full-bodied loosening, a signal from somewhere deep that things are, at least for this moment, light. And in that lightness, something opens. This is what I keep returning to about position, that it isn't just about feeling good, it's about what becomes possible when you feel good. When positivity moves through me, especially at the level of the subconscious, it doesn't just sit there, it activates something. Ideas start connecting, creative threads that were dormant start pulling at each other. It's like the mind was waiting for permission to play, and the positive state is what grants it. I tried to describe this feeling once, and what came out was, it's like a beautiful flower that blooms, but then shapeshifts into a blue sky.
There's a moment, and if you've ever been inside a creative flow, you know exactly the one I mean, where something clicks. It doesn't announce itself, there's no drum roll. 1 second you're in the ordinary friction of thinking, and then something shifts, and ideas start arriving not one at a time, but in clusters, connecting to each other faster than you can write them down. That moment is almost impossible to describe without sounding slightly unhinged. I've tried to understand what's actually happening in there. The best I can figure is that the analytical mind, the part that edits and second guesses and asks whether something is good enough before it's even fully formed, temporarily loosens its grip. And in that loosening, something else gets to move. Something associative, lateral, willing to make connections that the careful, critical mind would have rejected before they had a chance to breathe. The frustrating part is that you can't walk straight at it. You can't sit down and decide to be inspired the way you can decide to answer an email. Trying to force it tends to produce the opposite, a kind of mental gridlock where the harder you push, the less moves. Which is why the conditions matter so much more than the effort. I've noticed that the unlocking tends to happen in particular states. After laughter, as I've mentioned, after genuine rest, in motion sometimes, walking especially where the body is engaged just enough that the conscious mind stops dominating the room, in the shower, in that hypnagogic drift right before sleep where the mind starts making its own associations without asking for your input. These aren't accidents, they're patterns. And once you start recognizing them, you can begin, carefully, without over-engineering it, to create more of the conditions that make them likely. What arrives in those moments tends to be different in quality from what I produce by grinding. The ground-at ideas are competent, they're constructed, they do the job. But the ideas that arrive during an unlocking have a different texture. They feel found rather than made, like they existed somewhere and you just happened to be in the right state to receive them. I don't know exactly what to do with that philosophically. There's something almost uncomfortable about it, the implication that some of your best thinking isn't entirely yours, that it arrives through you rather than from you. But I've made a kind of peace with it. Maybe the work is less about generating ideas and more about becoming the kind of environment where good ones are willing to show up. That reframe changes things. It means the preparation is the work. The sleep, the movement, the laughter, the quiet, all of it is creative labor even when it looks like nothing is happening. The blank afternoon that feels like wasted time might be exactly the thing that makes tomorrow's session extraordinary. You can't force the unlocking, but you can't stop locking the door. When you look back at the ideas that have genuinely moved you, the ones that felt electric when they arrived, do you remember where you actually were when they came to you?